Welcome to the Deep Dodge. This is the show where we tackle some really complex, cutting-edge research and, try to boil it down into clear, actionable knowledge that you can use. And today, wow, we're not just talking about data in the usual way. We're really diving into what feels like a data crisis. I mean, we live in this world that's just completely obsessed with big data, right? This exponential growth in information. So it's always hailed as the key to everything. Success, innovation, you name it. But what if that explosion of data isn't actually knowledge? What if a growing chunk of it is, intentional poison? What happens when the system itself actually rewards people for feeding you misinformation? So our focus today is trying to navigate this really unsettling reality. The source material we're drawing on calls it the era of adversarial capitalism. This is where misinformation isn't just an accident, it's actively manufactured, often by, greedy, goal-seeking adversaries who know exactly what they're doing. We're unpacking a really deep and quite critical body of work today. It spans decades of research, actually, by Dr-Eng-Prof Yogesh Malhotra.
And his material really forces us to think differently, to move beyond just simple reactive stuff like data protection. We need to aim for something much harder, something like a quest for what he calls causal empirical truth, especially in these messy human social contexts. So our mission today really is to equip you with this kind of advanced skepticism. You need to recognize that the real problem isn't just the volume of data anymore. It's the calculated intent behind its corruption.
Yeah, and what's immediately striking, I think, is the fundamental shift in perspective this research demands. It's really a call for applying this intense professional skepticism to all data, the kind of skepticism an auditor uses, when they're looking at sensitive financial records. Applying that level of scrutiny everywhere, we almost have to operate under a new default assumption that any data we encounter is potentially adulterated, potentially compromised, until it can be proven otherwise. And not just correlated, but causally proven.
That's a really high bar, assuming data is wrong until proven right.
It is. And if you need proof that this isn't just theoretical fear-mongering, that this crisis is real and hitting, the highest levels, look no further than the scientific community itself. Dr. Malhotra's work specifically points to those high-profile COVID science reports, the ones published in top-tier journals like The Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine.
Oh, yeah. I remember some of those controversies. Retractions.
Exactly. Retracted. And why? Because the underlying raw data was manipulated. It wasn't like a simple spreadsheet error or a methodological flaw. It was deliberate manipulation. And crucially, it was driven by very human motivations, things like incentives, rewards, the pressure to publish, to get funding, maybe even fame.
So human factors corrupting even peer-reviewed science data.
Precisely. And that is the real-world consequence of this adversarial capitalism in action. If that kind of pressure can corrupt data at the absolute pinnacle of scientific research, just imagine the relentless daily poisoning that must be happening in domains that are far less regulated. Domains driven purely by profit. Think finance, social media, competitive business intelligence.
Yeah, the checks and balances are much weaker there.
Much weaker. So this really underscores why that shift he talks about, from just focusing on data compliance, ticking the boxes, to developing causal anticipation, why that shift isn't just a good idea. It's becoming non-negotiable for survival.
Okay, let's really dig into that foundation then, the human motivation angle. If data corruption is often rooted in, predictable human behavior, we absolutely have to look at the systemic incentives that, frankly, enable it. Dr. Malhotra uses these great phrases that capture it perfectly. Things like punished by rewards and when data-driven best practices become worst practices.
Those phrases really hit home, don't they? They expose the perversity of it all.
Well, they do. Think about this incentives trap. We set up metrics, right? KPIs, rewards, all designed to encourage certain behaviors, maybe efficiency or high output speed, like publish 5 papers a year for academics, or in business, hit a 15% quarterly revenue increase.
Standard practice.
Right. But if the main goal becomes maximizing that metric, the data output, the correlation strength, then the human actors involved, who are often, rational and goal-seeking,
they quickly figure out the game.
Exactly. They realize that things like accuracy, thoroughness, maybe even ethical considerations, they become secondary. They become obstacles to getting the reward.
Yeah, they become friction. The system inadvertently trains them to find the easiest path to the reward, and often that path involves manipulating the data, tweaking the inputs, rather than generating genuine, high-quality results. They become, in his framework, these goal-seeking predators within the system.
And the system rewards them for it.
That's the punished by rewards part. The problem with rewarding just sheer data volume or these really short-term metrics is that those rewards inherently, almost by design, punish the very things that guarantee long-term health and sustainability. Things like, well, truth, genuine innovation, proper risk mitigation.
Can you give an example of that? Punishing innovation.
Sure, think about software development. Say there's a huge incentive to rapidly deploy new code, get features out fast. That incentive structure directly punishes the engineer who says, hang on, I need an extra week to really stress test this for zero-day vulnerabilities. That engineer is slowing down the reward cycle.
So they might get penalized or just overlooked, even though they're doing the right thing for long-term security?
Precisely. In this system of adversarial capitalism, where the adversary isn't always external, sometimes they're lurking inside the system, or the system itself is the adversary, the internal reward structure essentially ends up paying people to make the system more vulnerable. It creates this dangerous feedback loop. And that's why this deep skepticism, this auditor's mindset, becomes absolutely imperative. You have to question the data and the system generating it.
Okay, so if we accept this need for skepticism about the data itself, how do we manage the risk? The sources mention a concept from quantitative finance, Derman's dictum.
Ah, yes. Emanuel Derman, a brilliant quant. His dictum is crucial here. Derman argued famously that when you're assessing a complex financial model, the right question isn't, how right is this model?
We usually focus on accuracy, right? How well does it predict?
Exactly. But Derman said the better question is, how wrong is this model? And still, how useful can it be? It forces a kind of humility, a recognition of inherent limitations and uncertainty.
That's a really profound shift in thinking. Instead of seeking validation, you're probing for the boundaries of failure.
Precisely. And the critical insight from Dr. Malhotra's work is that we now have to apply that same rigorous standard, that same skeptical question, not just to the model, the equation or algorithm we're using,
But to the data that feeds the model.
Yes. To the raw inputs themselves. We absolutely must ask, how wrong could this data be? And given that potential wrongness, is it still useful?
Or, maybe even more critically in this adversarial context, is this data intentionally wrong? And if so, what's the potential damage it could cause if we rely on it?
You've got it. That's the core question. And to really grapple with this intentional poisoning of data, Dr. Malhotra actually goes back to some foundational concepts from his early work in competitive intelligence, or CI.
Competitive intelligence. Like companies spying on each other.
Well, gathering intelligence on rivals, yes. But the key insight is that the CI program, the whole process of gathering, verifying, and analyzing information about competitors, serves as a surprisingly perfect analogy for the measurement process in almost any human social domain.
So like scientific research or political polling or even national security intelligence gathering.
Exactly. Any situation where you're trying to understand a complex, dynamic environment with potentially hidden or misleading information, the challenges are fundamentally similar. And in CI, the framework makes a very clear distinction between two critical concepts that are often muddled. First is data reliability.
Reliability meaning?
It means the believability of the source of the data based on its track record. Has this source historically provided accurate information? Can we generally trust things coming from this channel?
Okay, so source credibility.
Right. And the second concept is accuracy. This is about the degree of correctness of the specific data point itself. Is this particular piece of information true?
And how do you determine accuracy in CI?
Often it's confirmed by cross-checking. You look for corroboration from multiple independent, reliable sources. The independence is key.
Because adversaries will try to attack both the source's reputation and the data's accuracy.
Simultaneously. That's the sophisticated approach. They try to make bad data look like it's coming from a good source, or make a good source unknowingly transmit bad data.
Okay, so this CI framework gives us tools to think about manipulation. Let's dive into what the sources call the dirty tricks, the specific ways adversaries poison the well. These seem like old CI concepts, but how do they map to today's digital world?
They map frighteningly well. The mechanisms are ancient, but digital technology amplifies their reach and speed exponentially.
All right, first up is disinformation. What's the specific definition here?
It's crucial to understand this isn't just accidental error like a typo. Disinformation is incomplete or inaccurate information that is intentionally designed and deployed with the specific goal of misleading the target. The intent is malicious.
Could you give a modern digital example?
Sure. Think about, say, state-sponsored hacking groups. Before launching a major cyber attack, They might create very complex, highly believable, but ultimately false narratives on dark web forums, or even seemingly legitimate news sites. These narratives might hint at a different kind of attack vector or point the finger at a different group entirely. The goal is to distract the target security analysts, make them waste resources chasing shadows, while the real attack comes from an unexpected direction.
So they don't even have to lie completely. Partial truths can work.
Oh, absolutely. Planting partial, distracting truths or mixing truth with lies is often far more effective than outright fabrication. It makes the disinformation harder to dismiss.
Nasty. Okay, what's the next dirty trick?
This one is particularly insidious, especially in our hyper-connected world: false confirmation.
False confirmation. Sounds like what it is, but how does it work?
It occurs when it looks like multiple sources are independently confirming a piece of data, giving it credibility. But in reality, those sources are not independent.
So maybe one source just copied the other.
That's one way. Or, even worse, maybe all the sources got the information from a single third source further up the chain, and that original source was compromised, or was the adversary themselves planting the seed.
I could see how that would spread quickly online.
Exactly. Think about modern bot networks or those coordinated content farms. They specialize in generating false confirmation at scale. An adversary plants a piece of manipulated data, let's say, a fake rumor about a company's product having a serious flaw, or maybe a misleading narrative about a stock. Then, within minutes, maybe 5, 10, 20 different Twitter accounts or fake news aggregator sites, all seemingly independent but actually controlled by the same adversary, pick up the story and echo it.
So the algorithm sees multiple sources reporting the same thing.
Right. The platform's algorithm, which often relies on simple correlation or volume metrics, sees it confirmed multiple times and thinks, wow, this must be important. It boosts the story, gives it viral spread.
Even though the initial information was a complete fabrication.
Precisely. The data gains this false exponential credibility simply through orchestrated repetition, completely divorced from its actual accuracy or causal origin. It's a manufactured consensus.
That's really dangerous.
Mhm.
Okay, what's the third major mechanism?
The third one is blowback. This is like the self-inflicted wound of misinformation.
How does that work?
Blowback happens when an organization, or it could be a government, a political campaign, anyone, intentionally deploys its own misinformation externally. Maybe they're trying to mislead a competitor or confuse the public about something.
Okay, they put out some fake news.
Right. But then that same piece of misinformation somehow finds its way back into their own internal systems. It contaminates their own intelligence channels, their own planning documents, their own analysts' understanding of the situation.
So they start believing their own lies.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It boomerangs back, pollutes their internal information environment, and they end up making strategic decisions based on the very falsehoods they themselves planted. They get tricked by their own trick.
Wow. Okay, so those are ways to plant bad data. But the forces also talk about adversaries actively extracting or manipulating information using behavioral ploys, more social engineering type stuff.
Exactly. These are classic goal-seeking, often predatory behaviors aimed at manipulating people to reveal or corrupt data. They're ancient tactics, but digital tools give them incredible scale and sophistication now.
Like what? Can we trace some old CI ploys to modern equivalents?
Absolutely. Let's take the Phantom interview. Classically, this was, say, someone from company A pretending to be a headhunter to call an employee at rival company B. They'd conduct a fake job interview purely to quiz the employee about confidential projects or strategies.
Okay, simple deception. How does that look today?
Today, it's much more sophisticated. Think AI-driven spear phishing emails that look incredibly legitimate, or deep-fake video calls from recruiters who seem real but aren't. These could be used for industrial espionage on platforms like LinkedIn. They set up these fake interviews, maybe even for jobs that don't exist, specifically asking targeted questions designed to extract proprietary knowledge, details about internal systems, security protocols, all under the guise of standard recruitment.
That's clever. And related to that is the false flag job seeker.
Right. Traditionally, that was someone working for Company A getting hired by Company B, pretending to be a normal employee, but actually acting as an insider threat, feeding information back.
The mole.
The mole, exactly. Now, this translates to really advanced insider threats. Maybe someone is hired specifically because they pass all the usual background checks, often based on historical data and correlations, but their true allegiance might be adversarial. They get hired, gain trusted access to core systems and data during their initial honeymoon period, and then exfiltrate critical information or plant malware before anyone realizes. Their seemingly clean record was part of the deception.
Okay, those are quite elaborate. What about simpler tactics?
Oh, the simple ones are still incredibly potent, like the seduction. This isn't necessarily romantic seduction, though it could be. More often, it's using flattery, appealing to someone's ego, offering status, or leveraging social reward mechanisms online to encourage an employee or user to disclose confidential facts or opinions.
How does that play out on social media?
Think about the influencer model in some cases. An adversary might build up a relationship, establish trust with a target or a group, maybe flatter their insights, and then leverage that trust to subtly push specific narratives, promote scammy financial products, or solicit information that benefits the adversary's goals. It's manipulation wrapped in social validation.
Right. And the last one mentioned is the non-sale sale. What's that?
The classic version was a competitor targeting not the main company, but its associates, maybe key suppliers, distributors, or even big customers. They'd pretend to be interested in doing business, the non-sale, but the real goal was to elicit sensitive information during those conversations.
Like pricing structures, customer lists, future plans?
Exactly. Things the associate might know, but the main target guards more closely. Today, this tactic manifests powerfully in things like supply chain attacks. The adversary doesn't attack the main well-defended organization directly. Instead, they compromise a smaller, potentially less secure vendor or partner, the associate, in the non-sale analogy. And through that vendor's trusted connection, they gain access to the data or systems of the primary target.
So hitting the weak link in the chain.
Precisely. It's all about finding the path of least resistance, often by exploiting these trusted but less scrutinized peripheral relationships.
Okay, given this onslaught disinformation, false confirmation, blowback, phantom interviews, supply chain attacks, the role of the auditor, or anyone trying to verify information seems overwhelming. How does their role change?
It has to change radically. It goes way beyond just checking if the numbers add up or if procedures were followed. It means becoming an active skeptic, almost a counterintelligence analyst. It means actively working to eliminate potential disinformation and false confirmations from the data set before you even start analyzing it. But even more crucially, the focus has to shift towards identifying what's missing.
What's missing? How do you audit for absence?
That's the key challenge. The auditor, or the skeptic, must look for two things in particular. First, omissions. Is there a glaring lack of a plausible cause or justification for a major event or decision you see in the data? If something big happened, but the data shows no reason for it, that's a huge red flag.
Like a sudden stock price jump with no news?
Exactly. Or a major policy shift with no documented rationale. That omission might be where the real story, possibly the manipulation, is hidden. The second thing is anomalies.
Things that just don't fit the pattern.
Right. Data points that simply don't align with your established trusted patterns or your working assumptions about how things should behave. A critical failure point, as the research highlights, is the tendency to ignore or explain away these anomalies. People cling to their existing hypotheses. But the professional skeptic has to be prepared to say, okay, the data says X happened. But X seems causally impossible or extremely improbable given everything else we know for sure. Therefore, the data itself must be wrong, or at least deeply suspect.
So challenging the data based on causal reasoning, not just accepting it because it's data.
Yes. That ability to reject data based on causal understanding, to refuse to modify your core, tested assumptions just because some anomalous data point appears, that is the critical barrier. That professional skepticism is what separates signal from the overwhelming noise, especially when that noise is intentionally generated by an adversary.
This leads us perfectly into the core framework proposed in the research for actually achieving truth in these complex, dynamic, often adversarial situations. It's called the triadic hierarchy.
That's right. It's a way to structure our thinking, moving beyond just reacting to bad data towards a more proactive stance.
So it's got 3 tiers. Let's start at the bottom. Tier 1, data. What defines this level?
Tier 1 is the realm of raw data. It's fundamentally backward-looking. It deals with historical correlations, patterns observed in the past. It's often static, or at least treated as such.
And the source material calls it profoundly dumb.
Ha, yes. A bit provocative, but the point is that raw data in itself has no intelligence or understanding. It just reflects what has happened. It doesn't inherently know why, and it certainly can't predict genuine novelty or shifts in the underlying system.
And because it's historical and pattern-based.
It's highly exploitable. This is the playground for the adversaries we've been talking about. Greedy actors, whether they're high-frequency trading algorithms looking for arbitrage or disinformation networks seeding narratives, can easily manipulate systems that rely purely on historical correlations.
Because the systems are designed to follow the patterns, even if the patterns are being artificially created.
Exactly. They amplify small, planted errors or distortions into massive systemic risks because the correlation-based models just follow the herd, assuming the past predicts the future.
So the necessary action at this tier is primarily defensive.
It is. It requires diligent, almost forensic auditing, constantly scanning for those anomalies and omissions we just discussed, trying to spot the adversary's footprint in the historical ledger, ideally in near real time before the exploitation spreads too far.
Okay, moving up the hierarchy. Tier 2, meaning, what happens here?
Tier 2 is the interpretive layer. It's where humans come in. Meaning is about taking that raw data and putting it into context. It's about synthesis, understanding the so what. It's the bridge between data and potential action.
Because data alone doesn't make us do anything, right? It's the meaning we assign to it.
Precisely. Data might show a correlation, but the decision to act on it depends on the meaning we interpret from that correlation within a specific context. This tier is inherently human-centered.
But it sounds like this tier is also vulnerable.
Deeply vulnerable, especially to those insidious incentives and rewards we talked about earlier. Meaning is highly susceptible to social nudges, cognitive biases, and critically manipulated reward structures that distort how we interpret the data.
Can you give an example of meaning being distorted by bad incentives?
A classic example Dr. Malhotra often refers to comes from the early days of knowledge management, or KM systems, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Many ambitious KM projects failed spectacularly.
Why did they fail? They seem like a good idea.
They fail often because the incentives were wrong. People were frequently rewarded simply for contributing data to the system. Number of documents uploaded, number of posts made, volume was rewarded. But there is often little or no reward for the quality of the contribution, its relevance, or the usefulness of the meaning derived from it by others.
So people just dump data to hit their quota, regardless of whether it helped anyone.
Exactly. You got rewarded for input volume, not for the causal outcome. That is, actually improving someone's decision or solving a problem. So the interpretation process faltered. The meaning layer got clogged with noise. This is a perfect example of being punished by rewards. The reward system actively undermined the intended purpose, distorting the social reality of knowledge sharing.
So the action required at Tier 2 is about understanding the human element.
Yes. It requires integrating things like social capital metrics. We need ways to gauge human trust, motivation, influence networks, and the potential impact of incentives on interpretation. It's about understanding the social context in which meaning is constructed.
Okay, that brings us to the top. Tier 3, causal, empirical, current, real-time truth. That's a mouthful. What does it represent?
It is a mouthful, but each part is important. This is the summit. It's forward-looking, it's anticipatory. Its primary attribute isn't just predicting based on the past, but identifying real-time causation.
Causation, not correlation.
Yeah. The absolute key distinction. This tier is about understanding the driving forces behind events as they are happening. This allows for the anticipation of surprise, those black swan events or sudden shifts that correlation models completely miss because they weren't in the historical data. It's about dealing with dynamic uncertainty.
And the source material suggests a specific mechanism for achieving this, something involving quantum.
Yes. The proposed mechanism involves what Dr. Malhotra calls quantum-augmented self-adaptive networks, or QASANs. The core idea is that these networks are designed from the ground up to focus on causation, not just correlation.
So how do QASANs differ from, say, current AI, like generative AI or large language models, LLMs?
This is a really critical point in the research, and quite controversial. Dr. Malhotra explicitly argues that the QASAN approach actively counters the fundamental architecture of most current AI, particularly GenAI and LLMs.
Counters how?
Because most current AI, especially those based on deep learning, relies heavily on correlation-based reinforcement learning techniques. Things like stochastic gradient descent, SGD, backpropagation. These are powerful algorithms for finding patterns in massive data sets.
Which sounds good, right? Finding patterns.
It is good, but only under certain conditions. The core argument is that these correlation-based techniques are fundamentally designed to fail when dealing with what are called non-stationary environments.
Non-stationary, meaning environments that change unpredictably?
Exactly. Environments where the underlying rules of the game, the causal relationships, are constantly shifting. Think about financial markets after a major crash like 2008, or during the COVID pandemic, Or think about a cyber warfare scenario where adversaries are constantly developing new attack methods.
The past doesn't predict the future in those cases.
Not reliably, no. In fact, relying on historical correlations in such environments becomes actively dangerous. An adversary can exploit your model's reliance on past patterns. If they intentionally change the underlying causal structure, creating non-stationarity, your correlation model, trained only on the old rules, will be completely blind to the shift. It might even make disastrously wrong predictions based on the now obsolete correlations.
So correlation models are brittle in the face of real change or attack.
That's the argument. They can't detect the cause of the new behavior. They only see the resulting, potentially misleading, new correlations after the fact, often too late.
And QA-SANs are designed differently. How does the quantum augmented part help?
QA-SANs are designed to model these real-time causal interactions directly. The quantum augmented part comes in because modeling the complex web of causal relationships in a large, dynamic, uncertain system, like a global financial market or a complex C2 network, is computationally immense. You're not just tracking data points, you're modeling the incredibly complex, constantly shifting interactions and feedback loops between potentially millions of agents, especially when some of those agents might be hidden, unpredictable adversaries.
Classical computers just can't handle that scale and complexity in real time.
They struggle significantly. Quantum augmentation, leveraging principles of quantum computing, potentially offers the necessary computational horsepower to run these incredibly complex causal simulations and dynamic models in real time. This allows these self-adaptive networks, the SAN part of QA-SAN, to constantly stress test themselves against potentially infinite adversarial scenarios simultaneously, updating their causal understanding on the fly.
So it shrinks the time window for manipulation.
Drastically. It aims to shrink the window between an adversarial action and its detection and neutralization down to near zero, because the system isn't waiting for historical data to confirm the attack. It's anticipating it based on deviations from expected causal behavior.
Wow. So the action at Tier 3 is about building and deploying these advanced systems.
Yes. The necessary action is rigorous. It involves deploying these quantum mines, as they're sometimes called, to achieve reflexivity.
Reflexivity.
Yeah.
We heard that term in relation to Soros and markets. How does it apply here?
Here, it means creating systems that are not only self-aware of their own potential biases and limitations, but are also capable of continuously stress testing themselves against every conceivable form of adversarial attack or environmental shift. They need to constantly adapt based on unfolding causal principles, not just lag behind historical trends. It's about building truly resilient, anticipatory intelligence.
Okay, that triadic hierarchy data, meaning causal truth, provides a powerful lens. Let's apply it now to some specific domains mentioned in the research, starting with financial accounting and auditing. This seems like ground zero for adversarial capitalism.
It really is. Finance is where you see the Wall Street-Silicon Valley nexus in full effect. Financial data isn't just passively recorded, it's actively weaponized. Predatory behaviors like pumping and dumping stocks and securities are rampant. Algorithms, often designed in Silicon Valley and deployed by Wall Street, explicitly exploit historical correlations in market data for incredibly short-term gains.
And they often ignore the fundamentals.
They often willfully ignore fundamental value and, crucially, what's called Nietzschean uncertainty.
Nietzschean uncertainty. What is that exactly? Is it different from normal risk?
Yes, very different. Think of standard risk as the uncertainty you can quantify based on past data, like the probability of rolling a 6 on a die. You know the odds. Nietzschean uncertainty, named after economist Frank Knight, refers to the risk you can't quantify because it comes from situations that are fundamentally novel or unpredictable. There's no historical precedent. It's the realm of the unknown unknowns.
Like the impact of a global pandemic that shuts down the world economy, or a completely new technology disrupting everything.
Exactly. Those are Nietzschean events. And the problem is many standard financial risk models like value at risk or VAR fundamentally ignore this. They implicitly assume the future will look roughly like the past. Stationarity.
Which is why VAR models failed so badly in the 2008 crisis. They didn't account for the possibility of the entire housing market collapsing simultaneously.
Precisely. That was a Nietzschean shift, a non-stationary event, and the models based purely on historical correlations were worse than useless. They provided a false sense of security.
And traditional auditing doesn't help much here either, because it's backward-looking.
Right. Traditional auditing checks if the books were kept correctly according to past rules. It verifies historical compliance. It's not designed to anticipate these future causal breakdowns or detect sophisticated real-time manipulation driven by exploiting model weaknesses.
This sounds like it requires a completely different approach. The sources mention something called model risk arbitrage. That sounds intriguing. It's not just managing model risk, but profiting from it.
Yes, it's a significant conceptual leap. The core idea is, if you know that the prevailing models used by most market participants are fundamentally flawed because they rely on correlations that an adversary is actively exploiting or that are about to break down due to non-stationarity,
Right.
can you proactively design strategies to profit from that predictable wrongness?
Okay, how would that work? Give me a simple example.
All right, let's simplify. Imagine a standard correlation-based trading algorithm sees that historically, stock A and stock B always move together, a strong positive correlation. Now, an adversary knows the market relies on this correlation, so they intentionally plant misinformation or use manipulative trading to artificially pump up the price of stock A.
Knowing that the correlation following algorithms will automatically start buying stock B as well.
Exactly. The herd follows the flawed correlation. Now, model risk arbitrage comes in. Instead of following the correlation, you use a causal framework, maybe powered by something like a QA-SAN, to analyze the situation. This causal analysis detects that the upward movement in stock A is not justified by its underlying business fundamentals or any real economic news. It identifies the signature of an adversarial injection or manipulative trading in real time.
So you know the correlation is artificial and likely temporary.
Yes. You anticipate the inevitable failure of the correlation model that's driving the herd behavior. So instead of buying stock B, you might proactively take a causally justified position. Perhaps you short stock B before the correlation breaks down.
Because you anticipate the adversary will pull their support for stock A, causing it to crash, and the correlation followers will then dump stock B.
Precisely. You profit not from predicting the market correctly in the traditional sense, but by predicting the failure of the prevailing flawed models being exploited by others. You're arbitraging the model risk itself.
That requires a completely different level of analysis. And it seems auditors need to change too, probing motivations, testing for reflexivity.
Absolutely. Auditors can no longer just trust the numbers presented. They need to become psychologists and systems thinkers. They must probe the human motivations behind the data. Are the incentive structures within the company encouraging people to fudge the numbers? And they must stress test for reflexivity. That concept, which George Soros applied brilliantly to markets, describes these dangerous feedback loops.
Where the model influences reality, which then influences the model.
Exactly. Market actors, or adversarial algorithms, manipulate data. That manipulated data feeds back into the market models, which reinforces the initial manipulation, encouraging more of it. The belief starts to create its own reality, often leading to bubbles and crashes.
So auditors need to ask, is the executive bonus structure tied to reporting quarterly earnings, driving managers to artificially inflate inventory values or channel stuff? Is the system incentivizing its own corruption?
Yes, that's stress testing for reflexivity within the organization's C2, its internal command and control over truthful reporting.
So what's the proposed path forward for finance and auditing, according to the research?
The path involves integrating these advanced causal frameworks, like QSANs, directly into auditing and risk management processes for real-time causal auditing. This means extending existing sophisticated methodologies. For example, taking frameworks like credit metrics, which traditionally use historical data to model credit risks.
And making them dynamic.
Yes. Using dynamic transition matrices powered by causal analysis. These systems would be designed to instantly detect adversarial injections that manipulate creditworthiness. Think about someone fabricating underlying loan data to get fake AAA ratings for a complex bond portfolio as part of a larger pump and dump scheme. By deploying this kind of real-time causal detection capability, the focus shifts dramatically. Instead of just reacting to market crashes after they happen, you move towards proactively anticipating, detecting, and maybe even neutralizing the causal factors and the manipulations before the crash fully materializes.
Building resilience by preempting the attack.
That's the goal. In an environment rife with adversarial capitalism, it's presented as perhaps the only way to build genuinely resilient financial systems and portfolios.
Okay, let's shift domains. How do these concepts apply to nudges in social networks? This feels like where competitive intelligence hazards go mainstream.
Absolutely. Those CI mechanisms we discussed, false confirmation, disinformation, phantom narratives, seduction, They're no longer confined to corporate espionage. They've been scaled up and weaponized for mass social engineering via social media platforms.
And the nudge concept, which started as a way to gently steer people towards better choices.
Has become a primary vector for delivering misinformation at scale. Nudges, in the wrong hands, are tools for manipulation.
What's the core driver of this on social platforms? The research points to algorithmic greed.
Yes. The fundamental business model of many social platforms relies on maximizing user engagement, clicks, likes, shares, time spent scrolling, because engagement translates directly into advertising revenue. The algorithms that power the feeds are therefore optimized, often ruthlessly, to promote content that generates the most engagement.
And what kind of content usually does that?
Unfortunately, it's often content that evokes strong emotions, outrage, anger, fear, controversy. Sensationalism and clickbait often outperform nuanced, truthful information in the engagement game.
So the algorithm itself, just by pursuing its goal of maximizing engagement and profit, ends up amplifying falsehoods and divisive content.
That's the core problem. The system's own incentives turn data volume and engagement metrics into echo chamber falsehoods. It effectively punishes rewards for factual accuracy or thoughtful discourse if they don't generate enough clicks, while maximizing rewards for populist appeal, tribal signaling, or pure shock value, irrespective of any causal validity or truthfulness.
We saw this play out during the pandemic, didn't we? With health misinformation.
The post-COVID era was a terrifyingly clear, large-scale example. Huge amounts of unverified, often dangerously wrong, health information, sometimes generated by coordinated disinformation campaigns, sometimes just organic nonsense spread like wildfire globally. Why? Because it was engaging, it tapped into fears and anxieties, and the algorithms, doing what they were designed to do, amplified it relentlessly. The result wasn't just online arguments, it was real-world harm, confusion, and tragically loss of life, driven not by a virus alone, but by the platform's own profit-driven incentive structure.
And that CI concept of blowback believing your own misinformation, how does that manifest socially?
It's mirrored at a societal, even individual level. When users are constantly fed algorithmically curated content that creates false confirmation loops, reinforcing their existing biases and filtering out dissenting views.
They get trapped in their filter bubble.
Exactly. And within that bubble, adversaries can easily use tactics like phantom narratives, fake stories that resonate with the bias, or the social equivalent of non-sale sales, building trust within the group, then seeding manipulative ideas to further contaminate the user's understanding of reality. Your personal feed stops being a window onto the world and becomes a carefully constructed, funhouse mirror reflecting only what the algorithm and potentially an adversary wants you to see. You become progressively more resistant to external causal truth that contradicts the bubble's narrative. It's a kind of self-imposed, digitally mediated blowback.
So how do we fight back against this?
Yeah.
Blocking content seems like whack-a-mole.
It is. The research argues we need to move towards building meaning-aware resilience. It's not enough to just block bad data packets. We need systems that understand the causal processes of how and why people trust information, why they share it, why they commit to certain beliefs within their social context.
That sounds like modeling trust itself.
In essence, yes. It involves the quantitative modeling of trust dynamics within networks. Understanding the structure of influence, the flow of credibility, the role of social capital, not just counting likes or shares.
And technically, how might this be achieved?
Again, the proposed technical solution involves adapting those key ASANs for social graphs. The idea is that these causally aware networks could potentially filter nudges and information flows based on causal trust protocols.
Instead of just boosting what's popular.
They would analyze the cause of the information spread. Is the story trending because of genuine organic user interest and validation from trusted sources within the network? Or is its velocity being driven by a coordinated bot network, an adversarial injection designed purely to manipulate?
So distinguishing authentic virality from manufactured manipulation based on causal signatures.
That's the objective. It aims for a true network-centric computing paradigm where context, meaning, and inferred causal intent deliberately take precedence over raw data volume or simple engagement metrics. And there's a provocative benchmark mentioned, drawing from critiques of those early Kellyanne system failures. The suggestion is that by incorporating these deeper elements of meaning, context, and causal trust, there's empirical potential to significantly reduce the system's vulnerability to manipulation and herd behavior, maybe by as much as 70% compared to current correlation-heavy systems.
A 70% reduction in vulnerability. That highlights just how badly the current systems might be failing at protecting us from misinformation.
It certainly suggests the scale of the problem and the potential upside of shifting towards a causal approach.
Okay, the stakes get even higher in our third domain. Adversarial command and control, C2 supremable. Here we're scaling up from individual companies and social networks to, well, national security and geopolitics.
Exactly. The problem of corrupted data, when applied at this level, transcends business competition or social manipulation. It becomes a direct threat to national sovereignty and stability. Data integrity isn't just about profit or clicks anymore. It's about command and control, or C2.
How does corrupted data become a Z2 vector?
Think of a nation's critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, military networks, communication systems. These all rely on data for C2, for making decisions and coordinating actions. If an adversary, who might be unidentified, can successfully inject false data, manipulate sensor readings, or disrupt communication flows, they can effectively hijack the C2 process. This can lead to what the research calls endogenous cyber cascades.
Endogenous, meaning spreading from within.
Yes, like a disease spreading through the body. The adversary exploits existing internal dependencies and vulnerabilities within the target's own C2 systems. A small initial compromise can trigger a chain reaction, leading to widespread failure or allowing the adversary to steer the system towards their goals. Think Stuxnet, but potentially much broader and harder to detect.
And this ties back to that Silicon Valley-Wall Street nexus again. How?
Because the same technologies and mindsets driving financial manipulation are now being applied in geopolitical contexts, often accelerated by advanced tech, like quantum-enhanced high-frequency trading, HFT. But it's also about a C2 vulnerability created by incentives. Firms and even government agencies often prioritize short-term data optics hitting quarterly targets, favorable polling numbers, positive mission reports over long-term causal sustainability and resilience.
They manage the perception, not necessarily the underlying reality.
Often, yes. They're rewarded for producing data that looks good now, even if it means ignoring deeper systemic risks or creating data silos that adversaries can exploit. This focus on short-term, backward-looking data creates inherent C2 vulnerabilities that sophisticated adversaries can leverage for strategic advantage, whether economic or military.
So Dr. Malhotra argues that the real crisis isn't just data protection, but a crisis of command and control.
That's his core argument here. The fundamental issue, when you scale it up, is the potential loss of C2. The ability for an entity, whether an individual, a corporation, or a sovereign nation, to maintain its self-identity, knowing who you are and what your goals are, its self-regulation, controlling your internal processes, and its self-determination, making your own choices free from external manipulation.
And losing C2 means?
It means you're no longer in control. Someone else is pulling the strings via your data streams. In the most extreme cases, the research states, losing C2 can lead to the loss of very existence.
That sounds dramatic, but let's make it concrete. The research contrasts a fitness app with a pacemaker.
Yes, it's a stark contrast to illustrate the difference between data privacy and C2 integrity. On one hand, you have a fitness app. Maybe it collects your heart rate data, anonymizes it, aggregates it, and sells it to advertisers or researchers. That's a privacy violation. It's bad, but it's generally manageable at the individual level.
Annoying, maybe creepy, but not life-threatening.
Right. Now, contrast that with a heart pacemaker, a life-critical medical device implanted in your body. We know these devices have software, they communicate wirelessly, and they have documented vulnerabilities.
So an adversary could potentially hack the pacemaker.
Potentially, yes. If an adversary exploits those software vulnerabilities, they could theoretically gain control over the device's operation. They could alter pacing rates, deliver shocks inappropriately. They could literally gain control over the life and death of the patient through the device's C2 system.
That's terrifying. So data protection focuses on preventing the fitness app data misuse.
While C2 supremacy focuses on ensuring the absolute integrity and control over the pacemaker's function, preventing that life-or-death manipulation, it's about survival, not just compliance.
This puts proposed legislation, like the Data Protection Act, DPA, in a different light. The sources seem critical of it.
Critical might be too strong, maybe insufficient. The argument is that the DPA, as typically proposed, like Senator Gillibrand's initiative, while absolutely necessary and a good first step, is fundamentally reactive and ex post.
Meaning it acts after the fact.
Yes. It focuses on setting standards for data handling and then penalizing noncompliance after a breach or misuse has already occurred. The penalties, often fines, might just be seen as a cost of doing business for large entities, especially if the profits from exploiting the data outweigh the fines.
So it doesn't prevent the initial compromise.
Not proactively. The argument is that we urgently need to advance beyond this reactive stance to measures that are ex ante, before the event, and proactive. We need systems and architectures designed to prevent the C2 compromise in the first place, to anticipate and neutralize the attack vectors before they succeed.
Okay, so how do we build that proactive defense? The research points to zero trust.
Zero trust architecture is presented as a crucial paradigm shift. The traditional internet security model was based on the idea of a defensible perimeter, like a castle wall. Trust everyone inside, distrust everyone outside.
But we know perimeters get breached all the time.
Constantly. Zero trust starts with the fundamental assumption that the perimeter is breached, or will be breached. It assumes adversaries are already inside the network, or can get inside. Therefore, it completely removes the default assumption of trust for any entity, user, device, application, network segment, regardless of whether it's inside or outside the traditional perimeter.
Trust no one, verify everything.
Essentially, yes. Every access request, every data flow must be continuously verified, authenticated, and authorized based on dynamic context, not just on network location. It mandates strong, ubiquitous data protection, especially encryption data, must be encrypted at rest and in transit. The focus shifts from protecting the perimeter to protecting the valuable data and assets themselves, assuming the environment is inherently hostile.
Now, the research makes another really important distinction. C2 supremacy versus AI supremacy or quantum supremacy. Why is C2 considered more fundamental?
This is a critical strategic argument. While advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing are undeniably powerful and transformative, the research posits that C4I cyber supremacy is the essential prerequisite for leveraging them safely and effectively.
C4I, command, control, communications, computing, and intelligence.
Correct. Why is it the prerequisite? Think about it. If you deploy the most advanced AI algorithms or the most powerful quantum computers, but you lack robust command and control over the infrastructure they run on, what happens?
The adversary could potentially hijack them.
Precisely. If your C2 systems are compromised, the adversary can potentially control what data your AI learns from, bias its outputs, or even turn it against you. They could co-opt your quantum computing power for their own ends. Integrating these incredibly powerful but potentially brittle or unpredictable advanced technologies without first ensuring C2 supremacy dramatically increases your vulnerability, your attack surface. It just gives the adversary more potent tools to wield once they breach your defenses.
So whoever controls the underlying infrastructure, the networks, the communication links, the botnets, the data flows, ultimately controls how AI and quantum are used.
That's the core assertion. Whoever achieves genuine C4I cyber supremacy will ultimately dictate the strategic outcomes, making it the most critical capability for national security and even individual survival in this emerging technological landscape.
Okay, so to achieve this vital C2 supremacy, the research defines two specific actionable capabilities that need to be developed. What are they?
The first is adversarial C2, AC2. This isn't about attacking others, it's about attacking yourself.
Hack yourself first.
Exactly. AC2 is the capability, the organizational discipline to actively and continuously stress test your own products, systems, and networks using the most advanced penetration testing techniques available, simulating zero-day attacks, running sophisticated red team exercises, basically trying to break your own stuff relentlessly. The goal is to find and fix vulnerabilities before the real adversary does, ensuring business continuity and operational resilience under attack conditions. It requires a culture shift towards embracing proactive vulnerability discovery.
Okay, that's testing yourself. What's the second capability?
The second is counter-adversarial C2, CET2. This is the flip side. It's the real-time capability to actively detect, track, and neutralize attacks from external adversaries as they are unfolding.
So active defense in real time.
Yes, and it has to be incredibly sophisticated, especially given the complexity introduced by AI, the Internet of Things, quantum threats, and the sheer speed of automated attacks. CAN-C2 systems, likely leveraging frameworks like QSANs, need to be highly adaptive, predictive, and anticipatory. They can't just rely on known attack signatures. They need to detect novel threats based on deviations from expected causal behavior, and then orchestrate defenses to shut down those causal attack vectors before significant damage occurs. It's about winning the real-time C2 battle.
AC2 and CASI2, attacking yourself to find weaknesses and building systems to counter real attacks in real time. That makes sense.
They are presented as the two essential pillars for building genuine C2 supremacy in the modern threat environment.
All right, we've covered a huge amount of ground, from the philosophical basis of data skepticism to specific applications in finance, social media, and national security. Let's try to synthesize this. What's the overarching takeaway from this deep dive into Dr. Malhotra's research?
I think the synthesis reveals a surprisingly unified antidote to this problem of exponential adversarial misinformation. Across all these domains, the proposed solution converges on the need to build and deploy ecosystems capable of achieving causal, meaning-driven truth.
And the research suggests this isn't just a theoretical ideal, but something actionable. It proposes specific mandates for change.
Yes, it does. It boils down to three core mandates to operationalize this shift from correlation to causation to turn the theory into practice.
Okay, what's mandate one?
Mandate 1, audit the incentives. This goes back to the punished by rewards problem. We need to embed Derman-style wrongness thresholds and causal validity checks directly into regulations and standards. Things like the Data Protection Act need enhancement. Regulations can't just focus on data privacy or historical compliance. They must scrutinize the underlying models being used, and critically, the incentive structures driving the people and algorithms generating the data. We need systems that actively penalize the rewarding of manipulation and exploitation.
So regulating the system, not just the data output.
Precisely. What's mandate 2?
Mandate 2, real-time causal validation. This is about leveraging the technology. We need to aggressively research, develop, and deploy systems like QSANs or quantum mines, specifically for anticipation.
The goal is to drastically shrink the temporal window, the time lag between when data is generated or manipulated and when its causal validity can be verified. If you can verify truthfulness almost instantly, you remove the adversary's opportunity to profit from lag, to exploit the delay in detection. Speed and causal truth become the best defense.
Makes sense. And mandate 3.
Mandate 3, human-centric rewards. This closes the loop back to incentives. We have to fundamentally redesign how we reward performance, both for humans and AI systems. The focus absolutely needs to shift away from rewarding simple data volume, correlation strength, short-term optics, or engagement metrics. Instead, we need to find ways to reliably measure and reward causal outcomes, things like long-term sustainability, truthful interpretation, enhanced user understanding, demonstrable problem-solving, and overall system resilience.
Rewarding what actually matters for long-term success and survival.
Exactly. That's the only way to truly escape those punished by rewards traps that currently drive so much systemic corruption and vulnerability across finance, media, and potentially even security.
So it's a combination of regulatory change, technological advancement, and a fundamental shift in how we define and reward success.
Yes. And underpinning all of this is a necessary philosophical shift in how we view knowledge itself in these dynamic contexts. The research emphasizes that knowledge and the very constructs we try to measure, things like market stability, customer satisfaction, national security, are not static properties. They evolve dynamically, constantly interacting with environmental factors like globalization, technological disruption, adversarial actions. Therefore, the measurement of these constructs cannot be a static historical snapshot either.
Measurement itself has to be dynamic.
It must be a continuously evolving process, much like those advanced competitive intelligence programs we discussed, which are constantly adapting their methods and sources based on the changing environment and adversary tactics. Our approach to truths needs to be equally adaptive and anticipatory.
Which brings us back to that core quote.
Right, all data is past, all decisions future. That really encapsulates the essential conclusion. In a world increasingly defined by exponential misinformation, non-stationarity, and systemic uncertainty, the central question for survival and progress is no longer just about the historical accuracy of our data. The truly critical question becomes about our causal readiness, our collective capacity to anticipate, understand, and effectively neutralize adversarial intent and systemic risk before they compromise our future, our decisions, and potentially our very existence.
Wow. Causal readiness. That's a powerful concept to end on for the synthesis. This has been an incredibly insightful, if somewhat sobering, deep dive. We've traced the lineage of misinformation from, old school CI dirty tricks right up to quantum accelerated financial games and critical C2 threats at the nation-state level. I think the clearest takeaway for me, and hopefully for you listening, is that this kind of deep, professional skepticism we've been discussing, it's really not optional anymore. It's not just for auditors or spies. It's becoming an essential toolkit for basic survival and sense-making in the 21st century. Whether you're navigating Wall Street, evaluating scientific claims, managing a business, or frankly, just trying to maintain your own self-determination and understanding in the online world. Our goal here was to help you gain this knowledge quickly, but also thoroughly. Hopefully you now have a much richer framework that data, meaning causal truth hierarchy, to view every piece of data-driven advice or information you encounter. You can start asking those harder questions about potential adversarial intent, about hidden incentives, and about the quest for actual causal truth.
And perhaps, to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building directly on that C2 supremacy discussion. If command and control supremacy, the ability to maintain self-identity, self-regulation, self-determination, is truly more critical to our collective existence and future viability than even AI supremacy or quantum supremacy, then what does that imply about our current, pervasive, almost unquestioning reliance on historical, backward-looking, correlation-based data in fields as absolutely fundamental as, say, education, public health policy, medical diagnostics, even government planning? How might that deep reliance on the past be fundamentally compromising our collective survival and sustainability against the inevitable unknown and unidentified future adversary, the truly novel threat that isn't in the history books? That's something worth thinking about long after this discussion ends.